And I think that we've seen at least one entire course that could be taught, condensed into a 30-minute PowerPoint presentation. So thank you very much. And also thank you for allowing us to share this PowerPoint presentation on the website, so you can access it later if you like. You've touched on many issues. I want to just have a quick follow-up. Australia has tried to lead the region. Just a quick question, with the Asia-Pacific community, APEC and so on. How does it see itself? I mean, we've seen a lot. Your presentation is very updated, by the way, even including NCPO. But looking forward, looking ahead, how does Australia see Southeast Asia, ASEAN, and what kind of leadership, what kind of directions and thrust do you see coming out of the thinking in Canberra?
To be perfectly frank, I think Canberra is distracted by bilateral concerns in the region, by managing the Indonesia relationship especially. Indonesia is the most important country in Southeast Asia for Australia. Managing that relationship is paramount. It is for obvious geographic and demographic and strategic reasons. It is not Australia's biggest economic partner, but it can have a really positive or a negative effect on Australia's geostrategic circumstances. So, and added to that is what has been for the last 3 or 4 years, relatively toxic domestic Australian politics that have distracted Australian politicians from looking beyond the next news grab. And so, while there have been some great papers written by people like Tony Milner from AsiaLink and from the Australian National University, thinking about the future of ASEAN and Australia's role in ASEAN, and I've written a couple of pieces about that as well. It hasn't got the traction I would have liked it to get, simply because it's been crowded out by all the other noise. So while Thailand has its own toxic domestic political complexities, Australia's aren't in the same league, but certainly there is a certain narcissism in domestic politics where you don't look much beyond your own nose in terms of thinking great thoughts or thinking strategically or long-term, or in terms of broad brush issues of mutual concern. It's hard to find the space. To be fair, I'm actually fairly impressed with Julie Bishop, our Foreign Minister, and her attempts to grapple with some of these issues, and even in her handling of the relationship with Thailand following the coup, there was a sense that there was a need to be seen to be doing something, but not too much, because of the importance of the relationship, addressing some of the concerns there. So, yeah, it's multifaceted. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It's a candid assessment, very candid. And I think many countries are afflicted with similar toxins, not just us around here, but all over the world. Now, let me turn to Umesh Pandey. Umesh is a senior journalist at the Bangkok Post. He edits the Asia Focus. He also has been to Australia. He's very well versed on international issues. You'll see every Monday, I think, Asia Focus has covered all kinds of international issues, international relations, and regional issues. So, Umesh.
I'm going to shift gears here away from the security issue, more on the trade and investment side of it. First of all, just let me say about the NCPO. I think they already set up a committee that would be looking into ways of handling. It's a 38-member committee that would be handling ways that Thailand can catch up. There has been lots of questions raised whether Thailand can actually make it to the commitments that have been put in place for the formation of the AEC. This committee is supposedly headed by Thanasak, and he would be the one who would be helping it out. In terms of going into issues on the trade side, I think I'll give you an example of my 10 days visit to Australia, where I met a lot of the private sector government officials and what they think and what they want to do about ASEAN overall. ASEAN plus the key markets like China, Japan, India. I guess I wouldn't bore you with too many numbers, the GDP numbers and the exports and other things which are readily available on the web. But as John said, it's ASEAN plus Asia accounts for a big chunk of the trade between the two sides. About 70 to 80% of the trade is with this region, which makes ASEAN plus the key markets the key for Australia. I think in terms of exports, obviously the big bulk of the exports are either grain, coal, petrochem, all those things. More than 70 to 80% of that comes to Asia. I'll say Asia here rather than ASEAN as per se, but obviously big chunk is here. In terms of trade, I think about nearly 50% of entire international trade of Australia, 50-60%, this was figure in 2009 and 2010, has obviously gone up dramatically over the past few years. The reason that I was told and what the companies such as the financial companies, your logistic companies, everybody was talking about was they expect more than 3.2 billion middle class in Asia over the next 15 years, which would be double the size of any other middle class that you would find across the world. So all the rest of the world combined would be half of what Asia would be in 15 years' time. So it is in the best interest of companies from Australia to tap into Asia as per se. In terms of overall, I'll give a very good example of the state of Victoria, where we had a very good meeting with the businessmen there. Where they were talking about how to increase, the state was actually helping companies to facilitate all the way from the R&D down to the port facilities, the infrastructure, everything is being facilitated by the government. In terms of every aspect of negotiation and everything else, which is important because if you know Victoria as a state, you would know that a bulk of their exports are in the dairy products, and not many of us would know that Indonesia accounts for the third largest export from that state. Thailand number 10. If you look at Malaysia number 7. Lots of other issues that they have been doing on these aspects. What they are looking for right now is trying to increase the trade flows further. His Excellency has said in the past as well, the aim is to try to increase as much exports as possible. What is Australia doing to help that, apart from the infrastructure, is also what we saw was the New Colombo plan of trying to increase the awareness of cultural awareness. As John said, there's a lot of differences among ASEAN and Asia overall, and one of the best ways that can be undertaken is through educational programs. I think the New Colombo plan, which aims to have, it's about $100 million over 5 years that Australia is sponsoring, aims to have students from Australia get out into the ASEAN, into Asia, learn the way things are done, go back, help the companies, help the government, bring about more of what we are looking for. This is coming apart from a lot of the Thai, Singaporean, Malaysian students that are flying into Australia. They contribute about, I think, if I remember the numbers, was about 3 billion Australian dollars annually in revenue to Australian educational system. I'll get to there are lots of positive sides. I think what I saw on the negative side, which we can have a discussion on, is there's a reluctance among Australian companies to move into this part of the world. In my discussion with many of these companies, very few have actually made a big investment inbound into ASEAN or Asia overall. A lot of Thai companies, a lot of Malaysians, Singaporeans have gone there, invested. I was giving a lot of examples of Banpo. They have invested over $2 billion, $3 billion now, I think, in Australian mines. Indian companies have gone there. Everybody's investing in mines. But how many Australian companies have actually put in that kind of money back in this part of the world? I cannot think of that many. And in my question and answer with all these companies and all these government officials, including some very high-ranking officials, the only answer that I got was the top management of the companies are reluctant. They do not have the foresight. They do not have that guts to move out of their home turf. Again, cultural differences, the way things are done here, the way things are done in Australia are very different. So this is a food for thought. I think that one we should be looking into. If you look at the financial sector, even if you look at ANZ or Westpac or any other of these Australian Commonwealth Bank, how many of us actually see them around? The only thing I see in Thailand is Macquarie. That's also on the security and brokerage business, and that's about it. So it's something where we have to think about where the opportunities are, and is it only one-way traffic or is it two-way traffic? I guess I'll leave that to the discussion. Thank you.
Now we proceed to Gwen Robinson. I have to mention another hat that she wears is as a senior Asia editor of the Nikkei Asian Review. It's an up-and-coming regional weekly magazine on international affairs. So, Gwen Robinson.
Thank you, Dr. Thitinan, and I'm very glad to be able to participate today. I am Australian, although I have been outside the country for many years, however coming and going, and keeping a close eye on developments in the region. And what I see from a standpoint of living within ASEAN and having lived in other ASEAN countries for some years is some very mixed signals from Australia in the region, just like mixed signals from my fellow speakers actually, both positive and negative developments and trends. And I'd say that the recent visits by Julie Bishop, the new Foreign Minister, and some overall policies touted by the Abbott administration have been very encouraging for the future of suggesting an increase in the relationship. But much of it is just that, I think, rhetoric or big words that in reality have not translated into significantly increased aid, trade and economic relations. Most of all, I think, of concern is how successive Australian governments in recent years, decades, appear to have put an increasing amount of priority on Northeast Asia. Earlier on in the 70s and 80s it was Japan, and more recently China, India, and in fact China appears to have become a fixation in Australia for understandable reasons, which is if you only have to look at the trade and the huge focus on the commodities-driven business with North Asia. So of course, given that focus on natural resources trade, it's understandable that a lot of the broader priorities would swing to North Asia. But it does, I think, show some limited vision, particularly when, and as Umesh highlighted and Dr. Blaxland as well, there are opportunities in this region that, clearly Australia is either missing or not really capitalising on. on the political front, I think dealings with Southeast Asia, issues such as Australia's policies on asylum seekers and other such aspects, cattle exports to Indonesia, have soured some relations. Initiatives like the new Colombo plan that Umesh mentioned are very encouraging. What's not so encouraging are the recent aid cuts announced by the Abbott administration, which only look from here to be extremely short-sighted. ASEAN-Australia trade, yes, as Dr. Blaxland pointed out, ASEAN is Australia's third or fourth by other measures largest trading partner. But let's not overlook the fact that overall ASEAN-Australia trade has grown at a snail's pace compared to Australian trade with Northeast Asia, especially China and South Asia, namely India. And I think the aid cuts, as I said, have sent unfortunate signals. And as my ISIS colleague Jacob Hogan over there pointed out in a recent analysis in the Bangkok Post, since 2008, Australia's two-way trade with Northeast Asia and India has experienced incredibly strong growth, with Chinese trade more than doubling, with India, Japan and South Korea recording average annual gains of between 7 to 8%. And to put that in perspective, by comparison, total two-way trade between ASEAN and Australia has risen from $82 billion to $94 billion since 2008. That's an average annual increase of just 2.9% compared to the 7 to 8% with North Asia. On the business and investment front, I think Australian business seems to be deterred by a variety of factors, as Umesh was struck by his recent visit, and constantly when I'm talking to Australian business here, and these are the ones just visiting, because obviously the ones that are living here are the ones who have put their money where their mouth is and have set up here. But a lot of Australian businesses seem very deterred by well, just even simple things like differing investment regimes across the region. They're very concerned. They read about corruption. They don't want to deal with that. They don't even give it a chance to maybe see how things are working in practice. So I think there's a lot more, as Umesh said, guts to be that could be drawn on there to actually come and look and take a risk. The bottom line is that in relative terms, Australian business has been much more focused on safe alternatives or what's perceived as the big prizes in, say, the China market, trying it in Northeast Asia, North Asia. The advent of the ASEAN Economic Community next year, I think, and the new momentum that is helping to generate about ASEAN does raise some very hopeful signs. And you know, as pointed out by my fellow speakers, it is ASEAN's era in some senses, and I'd suggest that Australia, you know, for Australia, this is a perfect opportunity to seize on this as a new era and as a way to build on past goodwill and propel the relationship into a new dimension and really position itself to take advantage of these opportunities, because plenty of other countries outside the region are, including, you know, Europe. And yesterday I was in Myanmar at the launch of the British Chamber of Commerce, and the British are very proud of the fact that that is the first officially registered Chamber of Commerce in Myanmar. Australia is there, but they've set up as a Australia-based chamber and operating their informal chamber as a branch of the Australian-based chamber. So, you know, you've got a lot of strong activity in Myanmar now from way outside this region, from Britain, from the EU, the combined European business group is making strong forays. Japan is huge. America has just nearly reached 100 members of its new AmCham chapter in Myanmar. So all this is unfolding, and Australia is sitting at the heart of this region. It would be good to see a little more action there. So, you know, just from I'll just end with an account of some recent talks with some concerned Australian business people who have asked, who were very heartened by the recent trip of Julie Bishop to Myanmar, Laos, and I think some other ASEAN countries. As Dr. Blaxland mentioned, she intends to visit every ASEAN country over the coming months. And also, they were also heartened by other activity, including some Australian government funding to AusCham, the Australian Chamber, and to help set up, in fact, this Australian Myanmar Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Also some grants on skills training, education grant just announced for Myanmar, and other initiatives. Also the enthusiasm this government has shown for the New Colombo plan. It would seem to indicate a greater awareness of, or a new awakening of, the need to become more engaged with ASEAN countries. If that's the case, or indeed even if it's not, there are relatively simple and achievable measures that could be taken, building on earlier initiatives. And this also was discussed with some of the Australian business people I've spoken to. And one small thing, I think, which could really show the way is a small bilateral initiative with Thailand, the Australian Thailand Institute, now explained on the website of the Department of Foreign Affairs of Australia, a small bilateral body with some government funding for bilateral programs. There's also an institute for Malaysia and Indonesia that Australia set up, and there are informal discussions for them to be more closely coordinated. No other institutes exist, bilateral institutes, Australia and the ASEAN countries concerned, within ASEAN, and some Australian members, I think, are very open to the idea of doing more through such an institute network. With a combination of private and public sector help, perhaps, this sort of way could focus on strengthening bilateral ties that would fund exchanges, not just cultural programs, business, and most of all, I think some focus could perhaps go on assisting Australian businesses to capitalise on regional opportunities. For example, giving more help to Australian chambers of commerce and business groups, and particularly, I think, in an area that is of great concern to Australian business, comes up and again. You've had concerns about corruption. Australia is in a perfect position, perhaps, to put some more effort and aid or other forms of funding into perhaps strengthening institutions that are dealing with this within ASEAN countries. That's just one idea where there doesn't seem to be much focus. And I would just suggest that this is the time to consider new and imaginative ways ahead of 2015, the AEC, and trying to build Australia to play the role that it naturally perhaps should, rather than Europe and America and countries that are far beyond this region. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen. Just a quick follow-up, quick question to our Australian speakers, including the ambassador. Please help us Southeast Asians understand Australia's foreign policy outlook. When I think of, back in the Howard years, he's a deputy sheriff. That sticks. Now, the Kevin Rudd, the Rudd-Gillard administrations, they seem to have had a much more internationalist outlook. Australia and the Asian Century Project, they made resources more available for Australians to study foreign languages, Southeast Asian languages. In fact, requiring that Australians speak a Southeast Asian language, university students. But now it seems like they go the other way. The Abbott administration, they cut aid programs. They have combined AusAid into the DFAT, and it seems like they're more inward-looking. Is that the case? Please help us understand the Australian, under Abbott, the outlook.
The way I characterise, I think, a good way to understand Australia's relations with let's just keep it with ASEAN at this stage, is that at the government-to-government level, the relationships are very, very substantial indeed. And whether you've got a coalition government or a Labor government in Australia, that has been the case for several decades. Picking up on some of the points that Gwen and others made, I think very valid points, that where there are, and I don't want to say that we can't be doing more at government-to-government level, certainly we could, but where there are gaps are actually outside the government level, a government sector. It is, we need to do more to encourage Australian companies to invest in Thailand and in Southeast Asia generally, not just to trade, because our investment relationship is quite low. There's some good explanations for some of that. A lot of our big companies, our big overseas investing companies, are resources companies, but they can only invest in places where their mining is encouraged. And in some countries in Southeast Asia, that is the case. Indonesia, for example, so there's quite a lot of Australian mining investment in Indonesia. Other countries aren't so open to mining. So that partly explains. The other thing that explains, two other aspects, I suppose. One is, for very understandable historical reasons, Australian companies find it easier to invest in regimes which look a bit like Australia, so Europe, North America and New Zealand. There's a comfort zone there. But also, Australian companies haven't invested overseas as much as they might have more broadly because they've been able to make so much money in Australia. Australia's economy has grown without interruption for 23 years. There's no economy in the developed world, perhaps with the exception of Norway, that has done that. And none, as far as I know, almost none in the developing world. Australia went through the Asian financial crisis and the global financial crisis without a recession. So Australian companies have been able to make a good living at home. It's made them a little bit less adventurous. So I think that explains some of those gaps. On the education relationship, people have mentioned the new Colombo plan, a very good initiative of this government. So it's an initiative, which doesn't, I think, point to a government that's being inward-looking. Our education relationship with the region has been very much about students from the region going to study in Australia. It's been unidimensional. What this new Colombo Plan program will do, it will see $100 million will be spent over 5 years on young Australians coming and studying in Asia. And that will, I think, over time, lead to a greater confidence amongst our young people in dealing with the region, coming here not just for a holiday, but coming here to study. There are ways we're trying to deal with what are the gaps in the region, in our relationship. There are investment gaps, and the education relationship has been unidimensional. It's been about students going to Australia, not enough about Australian students coming here, not enough about research linkages, not enough about broader academic collaboration.
I think there's perception and then there's reality, and perception sometimes is reality, but I think when it comes to the kind of catchphrase things like Deputy Sheriff, to be fair to John Howard, he actually never said that. It was said to him. He just didn't immediately refute it, and it was stuck. And that, in terms of, not that I'm at all wanting to seem partisan, but I just think it's an easy shot to paint John Howard as some kind of lickspittle. John Howard, in my estimation, and I wrote this in my book, which I've just published by Cambridge University Press, a little plug here, The Australian Army from Whitlam to Howard, which looks at everything the Army did, the Australian Defence Force did from 1972 to 2007, particularly our involvement in Iraq, the Iraq War, which is very, very controversial. But the thing is that in his calculus, he was doing it for what he perceived to be Australia's national interests. It was not as a deputy sheriff. It was not to do the bidding of another country. He did it because he thought this is what's good for Australia. Now, people disagreed with him, but his calculus is reasonably coherent. So I think, it's easy to kind of diss that period as being, in a caricatural sort of manner. On the Australia in the Asian century, I was a big fan of that publication. I noticed though that ASEAN barely got a mention in it. It really was very exasperating when that paper came out. It was such a Northeast Asian focused paper. I found it very irritating. And Tony Milner and I had this discussion just about how can you just not place more emphasis on the immediate region. It was a quick policy turnaround paper written by a couple of people, not widely consulted, and as a consequence there were some shortfalls to it. And as a consequence also, it was like a lot of things for a number of years now in Australian government, it's been about smoke and mirrors. There was a policy paper, but there really wasn't that much action that came out of it. And then more recently, on the question about cutting aid. Now, I'm a big fan of WASAID. What we AusAid was, so it's no longer AusAid. It's now absorbed by DFAT. But to be fair, it's once again easy to caricaturise this as a terrible, terrible loss of aid. But I think on balance, it's fair to say that the cuts are to projected expenditure. They're actually not cuts to current programs. And so that, and we have seen Australia's aid spike in the last few years, and it's not going down, it's just not going to continue spiking. So it's plateauing. So I think on balance, when you sum up all of that, what we're seeing is, while it appears there's peaks and troughs, it's actually a steady path. The rhetoric aside, Australia's relationship with the region, its investment in the region, is pretty consistently on the money.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Now let's turn to ASEAN-Australia. We've talked a lot about Australia, some about ASEAN, but now perhaps a closer focus on ASEAN. Many dynamics here. Political changes in Thailand, elections, and recently last year in Cambodia, most recently Indonesia, to come in Myanmar. So a lot of dynamics for us to look at ahead of the ASEAN community at the end of 2015. What are we looking at, Kun Kavi?
Well, thank you very much, Ajahn. It's great to be here. As the last person to speak, I can agree with everything that other panelists have said and everything's here, but I will not do that. But first of all, to understand Australia, you have to be in Darwin. When I was there 25 years ago, I was asked, "Did you come here to die?" I said, "No, I come here to live." And then, fascinatingly, I'm from Thailand, so the officers took me to see crocodiles. And he said that Australians eat crocodile meat. I said, "Oh yes, in Thailand, we kick our lover to crocodile pit." If you cheated, your lover. So that's what we did. So that's begin my curiosity of this country, which is neither here nor there. Geographically speaking. I will not focus much on the Thai-Australian, ASEAN-Australian, but I will take up the key issue that I think will feature. I think Blaxland has given a very rich analysis. In fact, the whole, I would say, as Dr. Thitinan says, half hours of all this history of ASEAN-Australia relation, ASEAN interest in Asia. I will pick three issues. One issue is connectivity, secondly is regional security architectures, and thirdly, I think that should be the topic of this today's discussion, is Australia-ASEAN collaboration amid the rise of China. That should be the appropriate. Come on, Asia context. What is Asia context? In Australia, Asia context is China. I think this three issue is a cost-cutting issue. Connectivity is not about east-west corridors, it's all about everything, because I think what we have discussed about Australia is the lack of sense, I think connectedness still. You know, the lack of understanding. We talk about relations for the past 40 years. It looked like we are celebrating the duration. We still add we need some extra miles on substance on the ASEAN-Australia relation. I think ASEAN-Australia relation should have done a lot more. In fact, I started my career as a journalist, cover the Hawke and Keating administration. That was the best time was Australia initiative in ASEAN. That's what the old story that keep alive all the time. I seldom talk about ASEAN-Australia in the last 10, 15 years, even though they have done a great job. But you know, people refer to Australia relations within this region, always refer to Cambodian conflicts, always refer to APEC, you know, that sort of mediating role, peacekeeping, the good things that happens between us and Australia was like 20 years back. So I think that's keep me going. And I don't want to talk about ASEAN Australia now because it's about, like Gwen said, asylum seeker, you know, talk like about beauty pageants who are going to qualify to come in, you know, otherwise I will detain you. If you have children, that's fine too. We detain you. You know, that sort of things. And Australia is an amazing country. It get away with human rights violation. Look at the Thais. We got whipped all the time. We are favorite whipping boys for the past 3 decades. Our asylum seeker policy, you know, has been the talk of the town, especially latest TIP report. But nobody mentions the good work Thailand has done with North Korean displaced person for the past 7 years. Average 4 North Koreans a day arrive in Thai northern border, and we help facilitate. Connectivity also means that I think Australia has not yet come out with a very concrete, tangibles investment or plan of actions to connect with ASEAN connectivity. Other countries have done great job. For example, Japan. And I think because of the distance, it's very important to make sure that Australia and ASEAN connectivity, physically, people to people's investment that we have talked about become realities. My second point is on the security architectures. Of course, one can argue that Australia has done that in the early, well, as you said, in 1952, Australia has contributed to the security in Thailand, in mainland Southeast Asia. That was the Cold War then. Now, Australia has been really ambitious during the Kevin Rudd administration. In fact, I support his idea, Asia-Pacific community. I have written several articles arguing that it's time that the whole region has a much more comprehensive security arrangement. But at the time, the word Asia-Pacific is not in use, but now it's much more popular, and I think it's still very difficult to understand the notion. I must thank you today that you came out with PowerPoint outlining how vast the two continents, the Indian Oceans, the Asia-Pacific, how they link, and how ASEAN should be one of the driving force in these regional architectures. But there's still no answer to what is evolving in the ongoing regional architectures. And I think Australia is very doubtful of the so-called ASEAN-led forums. I think Australia pay lip service because most of the time in East Asia Summit, Australia is not on the ASEAN side, it's on the major power side. And I think it's the time that Australia must be on the ASEAN side. And I think the argument over South China Sea of late by scholar in Australia have been pretty good, you know. Australian scholars have argued that Southeast Asia must get their act together, otherwise they will lose in fighting with China over South China Sea. And many suggestions come up from Australia. First, you know, ASEAN has to increase the unity, settle their intra conflicts within South China Sea. And if not today, you are also suggesting that maybe ASEAN declare code of conduct unilaterally. That is a good idea, but it's also very dangerous. And I would like to see more Australian contribution to the security issue that ASEAN face on its own. And I don't want to use the word deputy sheriff, but I would like to use assistant sheriff, which is actually the same, but but it's more polite. You know why? It's very important because all along Australian law has been perceived that are unsupportive of U.S. grand strategy. In fact, I would argue that Australia has its own strategy within this region. And it's important that Australia craft its own strategy for ASEAN. And if Australia has, particularly on Asia Link that you refer to, it will succeed. So far it has not yet. Because ASEAN felt that Australia is not yet genuine, that is why there is no ASEAN Plus one-on-one ASEAN summit yet. You have commemorative summit when you ASEAN Australia 30th anniversary, 40th anniversary, but Australia and ASEAN has not yet institutionalized the summit level. This is very important. Why? It's important because ASEAN can connect it to each other as leader level without others. We need that kind of discussion. I think it's very important. And I think this time, maybe, hopefully, that ASEAN and Australia leader could agree, say that we will have this every year from now on. And I think, I mean, come on, 1974, you are the first dialogue partner and you still don't have regular summit? You must be kidding, I think. So this is very important. And it will help shape the regional architecture. And it was too bad Kevin Rudd came out too fast. So fast that Singapore was really mad. And Singapore really assassinated Kevin Rudd's proposal. Just shut it down, you know, in daylight, you know. And that's so sad. I think now the new expression of this regional architecture find their ways in Marty, Natalegawa in this proposal, in Russian proposal with this comprehensive collective security idea, which was proposed 26 years ago and ASEAN reject. And then China also come out with much more holistic, comprehensive good neighborliness, which altogether these three ideas now has been under the study of ASEAN. I think using my own gut feeling, all will be shut down because of the general feeling that ASEAN must take the lead in designing the regional architectures. Because now there's too many ideas coming in and ASEAN is so confused, you know, with Thailand domestic condition, with Indonesia's growing uncertainty, and many other countries still don't know what to do. Philippines is very clear that it has relied on U.S. assistance, now more to Japan. All these configurations has raised headaches within ASEAN because ASEAN can no longer stay united on common issue. And I think, as you can see, since 2010, ASEAN has been trying so hard to come out with the so-called common position on global issue. Still today, we still have not completed the metric over this issue. And I think there are one or two issues that ASEAN has identified which Australia can really plug in. For example, on peacekeeping. As you know, all ASEAN countries, even Myanmar, since the early 60s, had contributed to peacekeeping, or ASEAN country has contributed to peacekeeping operation, but on its own capacity, but never under the ASEAN flag. So I think this is one of the areas that Australia can fill in. My last issue that I want to raise is the Australia and ASEAN cooperations amid the rise of China. In fact, Thailand should learn from Australia in handling very sensitive relation with China. Because Thailand and Australia share many similarities, we are American allies. And we also heavily depend on economic relations with, of course, China. And Hillary Clinton's, in the latest interview in the Australian media, has warned that over independent economic with China, in the end, you have to pay very high tolls. You have to pay the price. So I think this kind of approach by Australia, how Australia handle this issue, I think Australia has a very independent policy, contrary to the belief that Australia follow America. I don't think so. I think if you read the history of Australia over 100 years, you'll see that Australia is very independent in its foreign policy approach. But then Australia is not like Thailand, they really committed allies. So you can do certain things that allies expect you to do, and you fulfilled it, and then you can do other things that also allies can do. In the case of Thailand, we are not really committed allies. We are not here and there. Sometimes we are very ambivalent. That is why it raised question in the minds of Americans, policymaker, that Thailand is really not committed to the U.S. allies. That is why today we suffer from this arrangement. And I think ASEAN-Australia relation will play a central role in the future when it comes to China. At the moment, it has not yet become an issue, because growing trade between Australia and China is so rapid that it will impact on the over strategy of ASEAN relation with China as well. Not to mention the U.S. pivot. As you can see, since 2011 November, United States has started all this rebalancing effort. It has great impact because all ASEAN country now has set up its own approach with or without United States. Thailand, I think, has not yet. We are in the process to review because of our own domestic problems. And I think in the futures, ASEAN cooperations with Australia in the overall security issue and with major power in the case of China will be much crucial. I have not yet go into the details, but I think it's very important that country like Thailand, Philippines, or those who are allies within the ASEAN member have close consultation with Australia, or in that case with some other country that also like South Korea and Japan. I was in South Korea last week for the whole week and witnessed the the aftermath visit of President Xi Jinping in South Korea, and how South Korea tries to readjust its policy. And in the end, my impression from that visit was that in the next 10-15 years, South Korea will be much closer to China and will consider China as one of the important strategic partner, no longer rely on US alone. So I think this will be increasingly will become the features in the region in Southeast Asia as well. So I think cooperation between ASEAN and Australia amidst China rise will be one of the new areas. And finally, I realized that the lack of understanding of Australia and ASEAN has very much to do with the media. I must say that Australian media has been very ignorant of development in ASEAN. If you Google, you will not find any good story at all on ASEAN. And I think Coup in Thailand provide the fresh news angles for Australian newspaper to write about ASEAN. And then, Burma, development in Burma in the past 3 years. But normally ASEAN as a group still need some space in Australia. And I think it's very important. Without the media support and understanding, it will be very difficult, because one of the issues that Australia can help ASEAN is to raise ASEAN's awareness in Australia. Because without this, whatever the Australia government initiated, whether it's New Colombo, whether it's the East Asian Summit, it will not receive support, or that media will pick that issue and write about it. Maybe it's good that the media did not write about ASEAN, because most of them will write in a very negative ways. But I think we should generate media interest. I have organized many media seminar, and every time we invite Australian journalists, they will say no, because they said that we have no time, because domestic issue at home is much more important than engagement with journalists elsewhere in ASEAN. Thank you very much.